super important. I think a lot of like how I work, I'm very extremely process oriented, but because I'm very process oriented, like I'm very influenced by just like everyday little things, or like going hiking and like catching a cool rock on the side of the road and like, oh, that's a cool, disgusting like color. Let me see if I can mimic that. And like there's a lot of little life moments like that influence these paintings, and you could see that especially coffee. Like, huge coffee drinker, every day making coffee, but you could see there's like coffee rings in the paintings, because like I'll be drinking coffee while I'm making these paintings, and I'll set the cut down so you could like go back and trace like the rings of the coffee cup. And I'm a fan of pottery. I drink a lot of my coffee out of friends' pottery, so there's a lot of sentimental value, like even in the rings. Someone I know made that mug from clay that came from the earth, from the environment, so it's a very sentimental thing. So there's a lot of little things like that. Insects, I started incorporating quite recently, making these woodcuts of different insects like termites, water bugs, beetles, ticks. Those crazy like red and black ticks. There's some of those in there, but they're all woodcuts that I've been cutting out or printing out on miscellaneous different types of paper, and then cutting them out and collaging them back into these mixed media paintings. And they're all kind of, everything's connected. I guess I show it through physically sewing these pages together. Like I'm making these really large scale paintings that are acting like different pages in a memory or scenes from a memory, and they're physically being sewn together. On top of that, there's like layers and layers of paint and coffee stains, different types of like, I've used turmeric. I've used
Jeff
turmeric.
Triggered.
Jeff triggered. I've used turmeric, matcha, flower juices. I did a whole series about when the pandemic started. Like I didn't really have any of my materials because I was in Louisiana, and all my studio materials were in Houston. So I was like, oh shit, I need to like keep working. How do I do that? And it was springtime, so all the flowers were in bloom where I was living. And so I went out and picked the flowers and made some like really old school Renaissance paint out of like these wildflowers. And so there's a lot of that in these paintings too. I have a lot of smaller drawings that include that. These paintings are working as backgrounds for my sculptures. I think a lot, going back to how everything is connected with its environment, my sculptures are very lively. They're basically forever growing piles of materials. I'm very drawn to how things grow in groups and how individuals act as individuals, either as human or animals or whatever, like how they interact as individuals versus how they act in larger groups. How they act in survival mode, that's like a really big thing that I'm interested in. When someone is having to live in survival mode, and it's like when you're in the survival mode mindset, you don't think differently, or you do think differently than when everything is okay and at peace. And so how is that person acting in survival mode interacting with these different things in their environment? My sculptures, I deal a lot with or how I make them. I'll make individual forms and think of them as these individual characters and personalities, and they're all each individually handmade. I don't use a printer or anything. Everything is completely done by hand. Whether it's like my paintings, my prints, or my ceramic pieces, but everything is completely done individually, so they all have these very specific qualities and textures that are completely different than one that's similarly made, but they're still completely different than the one right next to it. So how I've been working is taking those individual objects and tying them together and basically forcing them to be together in these little bundles, and then piling these bundles in these big giant heaps. So there's all these colors and textures that are being forced into each other. And so there's this idea that when you have so many things that are being repeated over and over again, that the human eye kind of just ignores it and walks past it, or they zero in on this one quality and they look towards that quality. I'm really interested in that idea and how different people react to the work. Because usually what happens from what I've seen is like people will see this big heap and they're really interested in this form that it makes, and that's their idea of what the piece is. But in reality, it's the little characters that are being forced together that makes the piece. And it's kind of like what we are as humans, right? Like there's all of these different mood swings and moments in time that develop who we are and how we act and how we survive. And it's very much like these little individual things that makes us as a whole in this big physical body that like someone else will see. And that kind of like spider webs off into this idea of like, you know me, but you don't know the entire self. Whereas like I know who I am because I'm coming from the inside. My process with the material is very apparent to the viewer. I'm not trying to like hide the material. Like it's very obvious that I'm using ropes and zip ties and fishing nets, and I don't keep the material a secret. And I don't want it to. I don't feel like the magic is being taken away. In fact, I think that there's more magic when the personality of the material is still relevant. It's not hidden, it's obvious that there's like pieces of trash or something. It still doesn't take away the beauty of what you're seeing, even if there's like a piece of trash on the ground, right? Like there's still, you could be in the most beautiful area and there be a little piece of trash on the ground that you notice, but that still doesn't take away from the beauty. You're still gonna like look at where you are as a whole and remember the feeling that it gives to you. And that's what you're gonna remember and take away from it. Next question.
Cactus King!